Okay, so thank you very much everybody for coming. This is our second training webinar for the Gardens Trust Green Futures project, which is supported by Historic England. And if you missed either of our previous two webinars, you can catch up on our resource hub, and Frankie is at some point going to pop a little link to that into the chat box. So just to quickly introduce ourselves, I'm Tamsin Macmillan. I'm the lead volunteer support officer at the Gardens Trust, and I'm running this project with Frankie Taylor, our engagement officer, who you can see there, waving. And our speakers today, and we're very grateful for them coming to speak, are Dr. Will Fletcher from Historic England. And if you saw our last webinar, you'd have seen him speaking then, and also heritage consultant Sally Stradling, who sits on the Gardens Trust Conservation Committee. Thank you ever so much to the two of you for coming. And they'll be introducing themselves a little bit more fully during the talk. So today's webinar follows straight on from the last one, which was 2 weeks ago, which introduced the need for NSIPs, large-scale infrastructure projects. And today we're going to look a bit more at the NSIP application process, the consultation stages, and some examples of real cases affecting historic design landscapes. Now, please don't worry. We don't expect volunteers taking part in the Green Futures project to get involved in consultation and make responses like this at this level. The role of the project volunteers is to do research on the landscapes, which helps us to understand the landscapes more fully and understand their significances so that planners and consultees can make sensible decisions. However, as a member of the public, you can, of course, get involved in the public consultation stages in your own time. I think the talk today will take around 30 to 40 minutes. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. Please do type your questions as you think of them into the chat box, and then Frankie will read them out at the end. And there'll also be a very short poll on how you found today's webinar at the end. So if you could possibly hang on until we've put the poll out at the end, that would be much appreciated. And we'll send you a link to the recording and a PDF version of the slides shortly after the presentation. So over to Will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, thank you. It's a slide, isn't it, to introduce me. So, yes, delighted to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak again and to introduce some of the work. I am a planning archaeologist of some 30 odd years. I've been working in archaeology and planning, and for the last few years I've been specialising in national strategic infrastructure projects. So that's a big planning, and worked on things like Sizewell nuclear power station with EDF and various other things like that, sort of heritage in big planning. In terms of where I sit in Historic England, I am the Development Advice team leader for the East region. Development Advice is the division of Historic England that manages planning applications, listed building consents and scheduled monument consents, that kind of thing. I'm also the infrastructure lead for the East region, so that's the 6 counties of East Anglia and Hertfordshire and Essex and around the area, and we're based out of Cambridge. Right, thank you. Next slide. So yeah, so I just wanted to talk through we discussed with Frankie and Tamsin, and the Gardens Trust is a little bit of a background to what is a national strategic infrastructure project, NSIP for short, because it's quite a difficult thing to say. I'm just going to give you, some of the slides are a bit wordy, so I would warn you ahead of time of the kind of detail of these things. But I'm just going to talk through a little bit about process, about that's essentially the plan making process, or the planning process, I should say, and a little bit about engagement, and then I'm going to hand over to Sally, and she and I will talk a few examples which I think will be helpful to you. Next slide. Just wanted to give a little bit of a kind of introduction as the kind of principles, really. So much of what we do in planning, or big planning, is based on a kind of mitigation hierarchy that was developed originally a long while back for environmental impact assessment. The principles being, within this kind of mitigation triangle, that the principle of an application or of a piece of work, whatever it be, environmental, waste management, whatever, infrastructure development, roads, whatever you can name it, should be able to be placed within this framework. essentially the first principle would be to avoid impact where possible. Um, the principle sort of develops, if you can't avoid that impact, then you should seek to minimize that impact, and that is a kind of plan, driven approach where you look at what the issues are and then try to reduce that impact. The issue, if you have remaining issues that you can't minimize, where your infrastructure is so important that it has to go in a particular place, and then the other options are then mitigate or offset. And there's plenty of discussions around at the moment, and not for here, about what an offset is, what environmental gain is, and what mitigation really is. But essentially, in principle, this is how it's supposed to work. We would like to avoid as much impact as possible, minimize impact, and then if it can't be minimized, or once you've tried to minimize everything, looking at mitigation and offsetting. But as it says on the side of the screen, there is a decreased return at the end of these problems, and therefore offsetting and mitigation can be challenging to manage. But it's worth talking about the principles, and these principles have come through from European legislation and now are enshrined in British legislation, or through the after we left the European Union. So next slide. The development consent process, and again, forgive me, I've tried to make the slides a little bit more interesting, but essentially this is a process map of what a large infrastructure project will go through in order to get to a decision. I've drawn a little red box around the pre-application bit, and I'll explain that in a minute. But essentially, the applicant's responsibility is to gather the evidence together as part of the pre-application, or pre-app as be shortened to, prior to then presenting the application to the inspectorate, to the examining authority, local authority, examining authority. All of the 5 stages that then follow: acceptance, pre-examination, examination, decision making, and post-decision making, are all part of the governed by the 2008 infrastructure planning bill, which means that they're very much a kind of process-driven, examination-focused approach, where the planning inspectorate will take the application, advise as to whether it's acceptable, will consult relevant consultees in about the examination, will hold the hearings and all those kind of things that people know about, and then there's obviously decision making, when the decision making is made essentially by the Secretary of State on the advice of the planning inspectorate. What is most important, the reason why I've highlighted the pre-application bit, is because that is the stage that most of the work is done. And it's a very, very extensive and confusing, or can be a confusing issue, because the pre-application can go on for quite a long time, can go through various different stages, can sort of move on to, can roll on. Do you want to move on to the next slide, and I'll do a little bit more on pre-application. And I think the reason why I've highlighted pre-application, I really wanted to flag as part of the process, because this is from a consultee point of view, one of the most important stages, and can be the longest and the most difficult to understand. As I said, it can go through different phases and go through different pre-application sort of approaches, including public consultation, design, development, redesign, essentially, and all sorts of things in between. But essentially, a good pre-application would involve very early and constructive engagement, and I think this is mentioned in the planning inspector's advice note 11, which says that what is good pre-app. It's engagement. It's looking at all the assets, the ability to collect together all of the information, identify all of the constraints and the issues and the actions, and then look to see how to manage that process all the way through. That's why the pre-application is so important. That's why it tends to be such a focus on that. The level of engagement is established at pre-application, and there's also a kind of setting of expectations, I think, in terms of understanding what that application might achieve. There's a potential for enhanced pre-application, so there are, under the new government's legislations, I think, of rules that came in April. Certain organisations can can recover cost against that time, so that it helps to build a better pre-application requirement. For us, it's about historic environment, and HE is not historic England. Could be historic England, or it could be historic environment. You know, these are the things that we are looking for as a historic environment body. We are looking for a decent engagement in historic environment, and that is across statutory undertakings and within our remit. It's an evidence plan approach, and I think this is so the applicant, when I say evidence plan, the applicant's aim in the pre-app is to provide a full balanced evidence plan on all areas of relevance. So whether it's environment, historic environment, or water, all the things that sit outside of my remit, but would be of interest to other agencies and other organisations. The local authorities are also involved in this process. So the local planning authority will provide what's known as a local impact report, and that is the application as they see it from their point of view, the principles and establish and the local issues that may not be nationally recognised. But so, for example, in a local example, it might be archaeology, for example, which is outside the remit of Historic England, but would be within the remit of the local archaeological authority, for example. That's an understanding about what might be considered as a local impact or a local impact report. And I've mentioned environmental impact assessment already, and this is the way that the process is managed. I've mentioned a couple of other stages there. You've got scoping, and I think we've got the preliminary environmental information report or peer report. So these are statutory stages which the applicant has to produce during pre-application. The scope is what they've decided to, or what we've agreed is the relevant scope for their application, i.e. what should be included in that report. And the preliminary environmental impact report is a statement about what the impacts are like to be, and that's often produced in public consultation for the public. Next slide, I think. I just wanted to mention something which confuses people, and I think is a very difficult thing to get to grips with. This is what's known as the Rochdale envelope. The Rochdale envelope is related to a legal phrase, I think, that came from a challenge, a legal challenge, and henceforth be known as the Rochdale envelope. What it basically means is that the applicant will go to examination on the maximum scale of development that they understand it to be. So if it's for a wind farm, for example, it could be the maximum amount of electricity that could be generated, the numbers of turbines required for that, and the maximum scale of any substation or whatever is required to do it. And the Rochdale envelope is really important because it means that an applicant doesn't need to produce final designs for that scheme. And it gives the applicant flexibility in terms of commercial advantage, because obviously if you fixed your design too early, they'll be then, could be then potentially held to a financial scheme or whatever. And so they, as is argued regularly by applicants, they need the flexibility. So what you're examining on is the worst case scenario, and this is known as the Rochdale envelope. So it's always going to be the worst case scenario. Sometimes what is developed is not quite as harmful or as difficult or as big, maybe, or even less so than what is proposed, but because it's not entirely needed. But the idea of the worst case scenario is enshrined in this Rochdale envelope approach and in the DCO. Next slide. And as I said before, the majority of this work in those 6 stages comes in the pre-application stage, and only when you get to examination. But it's worth mentioning that in examination, that this is an open, like as with other planning applications, as with local authority, the difference between sort of local authority and a local authority application under town and country planning and an NSIP application under the 2008 Planning Act is that the examination in public is a very serious and important sort of process in which all the evidence is examined in public, and where there is an opportunity for comment to be made. The planning inspectorate will provide a series of either a panel or an inspector, or a number of, sometimes in bigger cases, a panel of experts in order to ask questions of both the applicant and local authority and interested parties about their experience of the planning application. The idea is to identify what are the harms and to establish the public benefit. It's worth mentioning that the public benefit is determined by the examining authority, i.e. the planning inspectorate, or by the Secretary of State. So that is, what is the public benefit of an application? What is that national overview of what's important about an application? And therefore the decision on whether the harm and the benefit, which is a big thing in, which is a big discussion in planning about where things sit within a planning balance, it is very much made in these kind of examination circumstances, and therefore the decision making is not made by statutory bodies like ourselves. It is made by the planning inspectorate with their panels of experts and their national overview. I think it's really important to state that is a national process, and that tier is taken very seriously in consideration. They look through the documentation. Documents are produced in draft at this sort of stage and provided for the examination. The idea is for the inspectorate is to determine that those documents provided are sufficiently detailed to allow the examination and the balance of harm and benefit to be weighed. And that's a fair point. They can be quite formidable, I guess. I suppose is my experience. They're quite a difficult place to be. It's quite a serious event, but they are a public event, and people can apply to attend to visit or to make comments, and that's how it sits at the moment. Next slide. I think it's worth just mentioning a little bit about statutory consultees or consultation. There is at the moment under Section 42 of the Planning Act, and I mentioned the 2008 Planning Act, there is a duty to consult prescribed consultees, and you can see there we've got statutory consultees down in Historic England. Environment Agency and Natural England are often considered as kind of three of the major statutory consultees, but at the moment there are a range of statutory consultees, and the Gardens Trust and other agencies are also included in that list. Sitting on a tier slightly below, there is another group of kind of amenity societies, interested parties, and also the public are entitled under Section 42. In the middle of the pre-application discussions, I was talking this morning about a reservoir development in the Midlands, and here they are about to go through this Section 42 process. They're about to what's going to do a design freeze. They're about to they've come to a fairly major decision-making process about what this reservoir is likely to look like, and they're about to go for a big public consultation. So they are currently at the Section 42 stage, and it's going to be quite interesting to see but it will be I think the first time that particular application is going to be available in the public domain to be interrogated in any great shape. But we're still within that pre-app process at the moment, and it's worth saying that a lot of the consultation does happen in pre-application, and that's something that people can look out for. I think there's another slide on that as well, isn't there? Can you give me the next slide? And then yeah, so I've just outlined a little bit of this here. You quite often see this kind of in the little vignette. Consultees will send out leaflets and displays and put things into local libraries and put things on the internet, whereby you can give your feedback. And I remember talking to a consultee, to an applicant on a fairly contentious scheme about 10 years ago. They were saying that it took them about 3 months to work through the public consultation on each of these documentations because there were so many comments about it. And I think that's really important that everybody gets to, there is a process there which allows people to engage with planning. The consultations are quite prescribed, so there is prescription within that legislation, Section 42, in which prescribed consultation takes place, and that public consultation is supposed to be held so that as many people as possible can access it. Sometimes they go through leaflets, sometimes it's in libraries, sometimes in various different places. And as I said before, all the examinations at the moment, apart from a little spell when COVID, were held in public and in person, and interested parties can register with the planning inspectorate to participate. And then in terms of permission is granted by the Secretary of State on the advice of the planning inspectorate. And the development consent order, these are sort of technical matters, but the development consent order is a legally binding document that covers all aspects of the permission. That is what is produced at the end of it, which the applicant then has to do. That is in I was going to say it's not enshrined in it's not put into legislation, but it is a legally binding document that is signed off by the Secretary of State. So these big applications do go right to the heart of government. And it's different to other kinds of planning applications. In a local area, your local planning authority is the public and is the consenting body. So whichever district that you live in, your planning authority will be a consenting body, and they have a duty to consult on other types of planning applications in different ways. That's a whole other story for another day. I think that's. Is there another slide, or are we going on to examples at this stage? Yeah, there we go. So I'll just finish up before I hand over to Sally and say that's just a little bit of a run through the planning system. And if anyone's got any comments, we can come back to those at the end. And I'm very delighted to hand over to Sally. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Thank you. Well, hello, everybody, and thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to share my experience to date with this NSIP called Botley West. I have to say it's uncharted waters for Oxfordshire Garden Trust because we haven't encountered an application like this on this scale ever before. So I've been working very closely with the Garden Trust on this. A little bit about me to start with. I've had a career primarily in the historic built environment in both public and private sectors. In local authority work, my remit included historic buildings, historic landscapes, and archaeology. And from 2007 to 2011, I undertook some consultancy and then worked in-house as a landscape advisor for Historic England in the South East region. I'm a founder member of Oxfordshire Garden Trust. We started out in 2002, and I sit on the Conservation Committee of the National Garden Trust. My reason for involvement with Botley West is because I'm on the planning subcommittee of Oxfordshire Garden Trust, and obviously I work together with the Garden Trust, National Garden Trust, on consultations, and we've been working together on Botley West. So I hope that gives a little bit of background to my involvement. First slide, please. So this is a slide that comes from the landscape and designations and greenbelt side of things. It's the non-technical summary that was produced for Botley West. And as you can see, you've got blocks of red on this map. It's basically showing the landscape designations and greenbelt of the Botley West area. What's going to follow is some pretty slides, and then there's some text. So I'm going to talk to the pretty slide and then basically just run very quickly through the text, which I'm going to be speaking to over the pretty slides. Yeah, Frankie's just given you that instruction there. Just going to remove that on my screen. So you can see these red blocks. There's a northern block, a central block, and a southern block, which Tamsin's kindly pointing to. And these are three distinct blocks of solar arrays, which are all, they're distinct, but they're linked. And they essentially cover an area of 11 by 4 miles. So it's 11 miles north to south, and across is about 4 miles. So the location is just to the north of Oxford, and the blue area that you can see on the map is the World Heritage Site at Blenheim. And the boundary of Registered Park and Garden and the World Heritage Site are pretty much the same. I should say that I'm delighted that Chris Blanford is in this webinar today, and he will be helping us with this side of things regarding the World Heritage Site. So there will be an opportunity for Chris to speak in a minute. So, and on the left-hand side, Aynsham Hall, Registered Park and Garden, and on the right, towards the east, there's Yarnton Manor. Both of those are registered parks and gardens. The dark green blocks are ancient woodland, and the lighter green is greenbelt. So 70% of the Botley West site is on Oxford Greenbelt. Some of the facts are that if we go now onto the fact sheet, please, 840 megawatts of solar generation provides clean energy, could provide clean energy for 330,000 homes. It covers 1,300 hectares of sensitive landscape and extends 11 by 4 miles. It's the setting to Blenheim World Heritage Site. Most of the land is owned by Blenheim Estate. 70%, as I've mentioned, is Oxford Greenbelt. But here we've got the balance of national renewable energy needs and landscape and heritage protections. Other things that we're not, as a group, focused on are nature, farming, etc. Obviously, there are national targets that 43 to 45% of UK energy will be produced by renewables by 2030. So here we have the balance of the landscape significance and the renewable energy needs of the country. Thank you. Next slide. So this is a map taken at a very early scoping stage that we in Oxford Garden Trust and the National Garden Trust used to try and understand exactly what the implications might be for the landscape. So this covers a central site map. On the north was the map that goes to the east of Wootton and covers an extensive area there. We've also got the southern area that's not in this slide. So here you can see the blocks of solar array, and you can also see the red lines that are going through the blocks or alongside the blocks, or rather the blocks are alongside these public rights of way. So it's quite an intricate pattern of settlement here, where you've got intersecting river valleys of the Evenlode, the Charwell and the Glyme, and sort of narrow valley sides and so on. And with the solar array, it's quite a tricky landscape for this development to be located. You can see the areas again of ancient woodland and other lighter green woodland. It's not, the boundary isn't there, but you can see the World Heritage Site to the north indicated by a house sign. And Oxford is to the south. So in terms of the concept plan, what we were trying to work out at pre-app stage is broad brush approach, scoping stage, how many assets are affected in terms of both national designations, the registered park and garden, but also local landscapes of interest. For example, there's a Cape Lily Brown design landscape just to the east of Woodstock at Lower Dawnford Farm, and various other local landscapes as well. We worked together with other local amenity groups to understand what the impact might be on things like listed buildings, conservation areas, and other designations as well, natural environment and so on. So that's the stage at the concept plan pre-app stage, when local residents and local amenity societies, as well as the national amenity societies and statutory consultees, can start engaging and start trying to find out exactly what shape the development would have and what the impacts would be. And a number of public meetings were held at which the developer was able to illustrate the plans, and it was possible for the public and all these other groups to feed back in and ask for more detail. There's been a lot of asking for more detail. There's been a lot of iterations. It's quite difficult to keep on top of how many different stages to things there are and how many different phases and diagrams for things, and to then look at them on the ground as well. So if we just go on to the next slide, we can just quickly whip through the stages. I know Will has mentioned these. So far on Botley West, we've been through the pre-app stage, the phase 1 community consultation with all the scoping that went on. Then at phase 2, we've looked at details in the PEIR, preliminary information report. Again, we'll mention that. And we've already, between us with the Garden Trust and Oxford Garden Trust, sent in 3 letters in response to details and various amendments. And I should mention here that Chris Blanford and Sarah Cooch have been our experts in terms of the Garden Trust and Oxford Garden Trust in the analysis, and Margie Hoffnang and myself have helped in getting these responses put in. And it's taken an incredible amount of legwork to get to these various stages. We spent one whole day going around in a car looking, for example, at the 55 viewpoints, or the various, the ones that had been expressed in illustration form. So it does take a lot of time to assess. The acceptance stage, at the acceptance stage, more detailed justification and a detailed statement of need for Botley West was requested by the Planning Inspectorate. So that was lacking at one stage. It was just linked to the national need for energy needs, and further justification should be forthcoming. At pre-examination stage, there's an opportunity to register and make a relevant representation, which means that you can then have the opportunity to attend the examination stage. So this is a really important stage, and more paperwork had to be done. The Garden Trust and Oxford Garden Trust, and I have to say myself, because I live quite near, I've actually been involved with 3 submissions for the opportunity to register. The pre-examination process I'm going to just mention as my last slide. So we've been involved up to point 3 so far, and then points 4, 5, and 6 are yet to come in terms of the Botley West stage. Okay, next slide. So assessing change, this is out in the field. Just to reiterate again, there's lots of key documents and lots of iterations, lots of text, lots of diagrams. And what we did find in terms of the Botley West submission was that the indexing was difficult to navigate and sometimes quite lacking. And you have to actually say that to the developer that you need further help with certain documents and so on. Some of the key documents that we looked at, if you go on to the next page with the text on it, the Garden Trust has a statutory duty in relation to registered parks and gardens and the World Heritage Site, together with non-designated heritage assets being looked at by local garden trusts. Should mention here the UNESCO Convention and the fact that that is a separate side of things which affects the World Heritage Site, which I hope Chris will talk to in just a second, to explain what the difference is between the registered park and garden and how that fits in the planning system, and how the UNESCO Convention and a World Heritage Site sits in regard to the planning system. Then we've got national policy statements that Will has mentioned. We've got the NPPF, heritage paragraphs, other documents that we looked at with the setting of heritage assets by Historic England, and the detailed assessment of impacts in the PIR and the landscape and visual resources chapters that you have to keep referring to and juggling with in terms of all these other landscape documents. And also to look at things like the Botley West non-technical summary, and very importantly, the Blenheim World Heritage Site Management Plan. So I just wondered if Chris Blanford might be able to come in here at this stage and explain the differences between the RPG and the World Heritage Site and how it sits in the planning system. Because the checks and balances are different.
Yep. Can you hear me as first question?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. try to keep this as simple as I can.
Chris, could I just ask you first to just explain your links to World Heritage Sites,
Yep,
how you're
yes,
involved?
of
Thank
course.
you.
Okay, so quick
Thank you.
introduction. I'm privileged to be president of World Heritage UK, which is an NGO that sits between the government policy and processing of World Heritage Sites in the UK and the local World Heritage Site managers or coordinators on the ground. So we help government provide the detail from the ground upwards, but we also provide expertise and advice in policy setting and the like. And as an organization, it's quite small, smaller than the Gardens Trust, but actually probably punches above its weight in terms of its influence on government. If anybody wants to know more about that, set a question later rather than use the time up. I think the first point to make with regard to Botley, just so we're clear about this, sticking really with the World Heritage side of things, because Sally's obviously covered the historic garden side of things. When I looked at this in detail some months ago now, and it was useful because I think it helped fill gaps as people were beginning to understand the impact. At least on the World Heritage site, it goes as follows. The World Heritage site itself in Blenheim is actually quite well screened and inward looking, and always has been since its inscription early, I think in the 80s. And it does not have a formal World Heritage Site buffer zone, which UNESCO advise may be necessary, but they don't make it mandatory. And many of the early World Heritage Sites in this country had buffer zones or did not have buffer zones, so there's no consistency. At Blenheim, the decision at the time, when setting and the like had not really been thought about much as a concept, was that the palace sitting in the park had its, as it were, own internal buffer zone without calling it. So the World Heritage Site boundary today is the park and the palace. The management plan that was just referred to is very clear, though, that the wider setting of Blenheim, that is the landscape character of the area in which these arrays are being put, was considered to be and acknowledged to be by the Blenheim Foundation the setting for the World Heritage Site, in the sense that the very highly designed parkland and landscape within the boundaries of the World Heritage Site are complementary to the more typical high quality landscapes that surround it. But it is not a formal buffer zone, nor is it a formal setting. And that really is the issue here, because what we have is a balance to be struck, as Will said earlier, between two things that are good. We want renewable energy, and we want to retain the high quality character of the setting of Blenheim. It's apples and oranges, so a balance will need to be struck and considered by PINs when they get to it. The other point to make is, as Sally alluded to, the planning system here in the UK already accommodates the Parks and Gardens statutory consultation and evaluation. That's what the Gardens Trust does. And that's, for the moment at least, still inherent in the planning process, because the Gardens Trust is a statutory consultee, and it has the duty of care to put that comment, as it has done, into any infrastructure project, including Botley. The process for World Heritage Site assessment is not directly part of the planning system, though World Heritage Sites are mentioned in the NPPF. The same applies where in the NPPF, the impact of a piece of infrastructure on a designated asset is essentially balancing that damage versus public good. That's what the NPPF does. However, in UNESCO's terms, public good is not a criteria that is used. So the outstanding universal value of a World Heritage Site, which is its reason for being inscribed in the first place, does not necessarily include public good. And therefore, there is a difference. There also is a difference between the timing. So UNESCO only carry out assessment decisions on impact on World Heritage Sites once a year at their meeting in the World Heritage Committee meetings in July. And of course, they've got the world to worry about as well as the UK. So they are incredibly busy and overstretched as an organization. In one sense, this isn't terribly helpful because the UK planning system trundles on as it is doing here in Botley. And it's quite likely that UNESCO will not start looking at this one until next year, by which time there may have been a decision on Botley. So this is a constant problem when we try to put the impact of development on World Heritage Sites alongside the impacts as judged in our own planning system. Someone will ask, no doubt, given what happened to Liverpool and the risks that are often outlined in the press for impact on World Heritage Sites, will it lose its status? That is, will it lose its status as a World Heritage Site if this scheme goes ahead? Well, obviously, I can't answer that, but it is possible. I would say my own view is unlikely, and I say that because UNESCO may well fall back on the fact that the impact directly on the World Heritage Site, that is within the boundaries of the parkland, is not that great. And they may say, because there is no formal buffer zone, therefore there isn't an impact on the setting either. There clearly is, and they do care about wider setting, and it's a concept that UNESCO uses a lot more these days. But I think more serious is if the planning inspectorate give this permission, then the horse will have bolted by the time UNESCO get round to looking at it, and that obviously is a problem. Though obviously they have been consulted, World Heritage UK and no doubt Historic England have made their comments during the consultation, so we will have to wait and see. Anything else I can add? I don't think so. If that raises any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks very much, Chris. I think that's really key information for everybody to be able to think about in terms of a normal registered park and garden and the difference between having a World Heritage Site. And obviously here at Botley West, there are no direct impacts on the World Heritage Site, but it's all about setting. Mm-hmm. This whole application is all about setting of the World Heritage Site. Thank you. So I think we probably had enough on assessing change. These slides will be available to you anyway afterwards. So if we could go on to the next one, please, Tamsin. So this is a view from the south front of Blenheim, looking south towards Bladen Church Tower. And if you can kindly point it out, there it is in the landscape. So this is one of the key views and vistas that's mentioned in the management plan. It's on an axis from the Column of Victory, which is behind you as you're looking at this, and then comes the palace, and then is the church tower. And in terms of the message that's to be conveyed in terms of Blenheim. It's all about the earthly journey of John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough, through his estate to his country house and then to his final resting place in Blaydon. Anyway, this slide, I wanted to pick out the differences between the viewpoints and intervisibility aspects of considering an NSIP, and also the intrinsic quality and significance of the wider setting. And also to mention that in the World Heritage Site Management Plan, one of the key attributes that's mentioned is the farmed landscape of Blenheim Estate, and how important that is as a setting to the palace and its inner, more private landscape, which Chris has already mentioned. So outside this immediate landscape that you can see here, the south front and the trees and the ancient woodlands that starts to come on the right-hand side, you can see the church tower, and beyond that is Blaydon Heath, and on the hilltop, and it's in that area there that you would see some solar array. You might do. We've yet to properly assess some of the slight changes that have been made to the proposed location of them. But in any case, it's the mosaic of fields, river valleys, together with the sort of farmhouses, listed buildings, the archaeology, the ancient woodland, all of these different aspects that are nested in the landscape that we're really thinking about in terms of its setting and the relevance and the interrelationships between all of those. In terms of impacts, I'm now sort of turning to the text. We have to think in terms of what the cable runs would be, the 2-meter high fences, the solar arrays, between 1 to 2 million panels. I haven't found a complete figure. The size of the panels and their impacts, 1.8 meters to 2.5 meters above ground, consideration of what the piling 1.5 to 2 meters below ground would be, the size of the substation near Farmore, the removal of sections of ancient hedgerows, the glint and glare, settings of assets like trees, ancient woodland archaeology, as well as the World Heritage Site and Registered Parks and Gardens, Yarnton Manor and Ancient Hall, together with local landscapes, including public rights of way, which we consider to be linear landscapes, and what the cumulative impact of all of this might be. It's quite a huge task to try and assess just what the impact would be on those. So we're not just looking at views and intervisibility, but the intrinsic landscape character and the wider Blenheim Farmed Estate landscape and the setting to the palace. So 18 representative viewpoints were brought forward at scoping stage by the developer, 55 at PER stage, but not all with visualizations or both ways. So we've asked for more detail and more assessments. We have had some feedback in terms of mitigation that has been achieved. There have been increased buffers with non-designated heritage assets, together with some offers to do horizontal directional drilling instead of cut and fill methods of putting cabling in, to avoid, for example, the local wildlife site at Longmead Meadow with this ancient meadows near Aynsham, and also to move away from the scheduled monument Roman villa site at Sansom's Plat, which is quite near Blenheim. In terms of mitigation for the World Heritage Site, there's only been slight adjustments made. For example, panels have been moved further away southeast of Blaydon, and other panels have been moved from fields south from Blaydon Church. So some slight adjustments have been made. I think my last slide, we can move to that. This is the iconic view of Blenheim that you see of Queen Pool and the Grand Bridge in the centre of the picture. To the left is Blenheim Palace itself, and to the right, where there are clumps of trees, is where the original palace at Woodstock used to be located. That's it, just in there, that was removed by Sarah Churchill. She didn't like it, and so she argued with Vanbrugh, and the old palace was removed. Anyway, this last slide is really just to give you a glimpse, if you haven't already seen it, of the World Heritage Site, the sort of inner site at Blenheim. As Chris has said, it's quite self-contained and inward-looking, but there is this palmed, wider Blenheim estate outside it. So what stage is Botley West at now, and when can we expect the next update? Well, the Garden Trust and Oxford Garden Trust have registered as interested parties, and we raised serious concerns about the heritage assessment in relation to the registered park and garden and the World Heritage Site, because we felt it relied a lot on the visual criteria but ignored the intrinsic qualities of the landscape setting. We were also critical that a full heritage impact assessment had not been undertaken to inform the early stages of the project. So now the examining authority have issued a Rule 6 letter setting out matters to reconcile and a date of a preliminary meeting, which was actually held 2 days ago on the 13th. Essentially, that discusses the timetable, topics and procedures for the examination of Botley West Solar Farm, which interested parties can attend, registered interested parties can attend. And we'll be expecting a Rule 8 letter setting out the final examination timetable anytime after this point in time. We'll be expecting that. So that in a nutshell is where we've got to, and I hope that's explained a little bit of what we've been trying to achieve. Thank you.
Right, onwards, back to me again, I think, isn't it? Do you want to go to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. I thought it'd be worth just running through a couple of other examples quickly at the end here, just to give you a bit of a flavour for how developments work around this one. Do you want to go to the next slide? This is the example of Sonica. Sonica is another large solar farm which is recently granted permission. So this is an old example, and all the documentation is available if anybody wishes to explore deeper into it. For those sharp-eyed amongst you, recognise this is East Cambridgeshire. It's on the border of Suffolk, so parts in Suffolk, part in East Cambs, and covers the borders. Sorry, excuse me. Even sharper-eyed amongst you will notice that in the middle is Chippenham Park, a Grade 2 registered park, and there are various other heritage assets in this area as well. It's a bit of Eastern Heath area, and Newmarket to the south is obviously famous for the horse racing industry. Next slide. To zone in a bit carefully, this is the word according to when we look at these things is that you can see that I've marked them all out on a snip from our GIS. So the red is scheduled monuments. There's a Roman villa to the west, along with a moated site at Landwade, which is a bit out of scope, so that's not necessary. Here is the park and garden, and I think it's worth noting that the hall itself is in the middle. Thank you very much. Lovely point of work. Thank you. And then there's right at the bottom of that, there is a very famous set of gates, lodges, and this sort of triumphal arch, which is Grade 2 listed, and it used to have a formal avenue which linked, which you would process to the park from Newmarket. Unfortunately, severed by the A11 back in the day. But obviously an important design feature of the landscape, which was allow people to approach the house by the lodge and gardens. There's also a very early prehistoric late Bronze Age round barrow group, very fine group of extensive round barrows down in the bottom corner, highlighted in the red box. Next slide. Cutting a long story short, I haven't gone to all of the details, but you can see here is a snapshot of what, after the discussions with the developer, I think in this case, I will agree it's a very was collaborative developer, I would say, who listened to advice and approach things in particular way. You can see that there is a very large buffer on the avenue. The park itself has buffers. The environmental buffers are in green hashed areas. But I think it's also worth pointing out that the purple areas with the vertical stripes, which those with good eyesight will notice, is native grassland planting with archaeological mitigation areas. These are, you can see there's an area where the barrows have been taken out of conservation. There are some other areas of archaeology. There was a World War II bomber site with military remains and another Roman villa found right up on the western corner. So all these areas have been taken out of the, will not will not have panels over the top of them. They've been excluded from the development, but instead we are using those areas for environmental mitigation. In particular, what's important in this area is acid grass in the heathland landscapes, and management of the archaeological features. So there's a doubling up on stone curlew habitat, as I say, native acid grassland, and also for archaeology. So double mitigation in this context. Understandably, there are some local concerns and considerations, and the parkland is an important feature within this landscape. But obviously, we have to, as was discussed by Chris and by Sally, the public benefits and are examined elsewhere and not by us. It's our responsibility as a statutory consultee to identify what the key issues are, and this is quite often the kind of process that is developed. I think it's worth just having a look at some examples where this has been achieved. Next slide, I think, is the and I think just wanted to highlight what the main outcomes here were. That there are these buffers, environmental buffers and planting buffers. So screening, enhanced management of historic features. So the barrows will come out of cultivation and be placed into management with public access. That's a specific heritage mitigation area, and then we've doubled up with ecological mitigation. Next slide. And I think finally, I've just one more example, and I just wanted to bring in this as a very interesting and sort of difficult, challenging issue for National Grid down in South Suffolk. Do we go to the next slide? I think there's one more slide left. So I've just highlighted what sometimes happens when you look at the visual impact assessment. This is this is some of the views around East Suffolk, and what we were talking about in this case with regards to Hindlesham was the pylons in the landscape and where the pylons are positioned. Next slide. This is Hindlesham Hall. It's a very formal design frontage with an avenue and a view from the frontage, and also from the upper story looking down over the avenue. As it was originally in the first iteration of the proposal had pylons. It's in just off the edge of the landscape area, Dedham Vale National Landscape. And there is a proposal within this area to place the pylons underground in order to protect the setting and the impact to reduce the impact on the national landscape. The pylons and the issues that are involved for in this are essentially where the pylons drop into the ground, and in the original iteration there was a pylon placed right in the view as you would view from the front of Hindlesham Hall. And again, I think the issues here, working with the applicant, we were able to ask them to reconsider this. Could they do something to mitigate? And indeed they consented to do so and move the pylons out of the view, so that there's no longer an impact from the front of the hall, and also some of the screening, off-site screening and off-site replanting of some of the parkland areas around Hindlesham Hall is being considered, and I don't know whether I can't remember where we are, whether it's been consented or not, but one of the issues was to add additional screening to screen some of the pylons which are now off to the side. So another great, good example of collaboration and good work. I think that's the last slide. So I think we're only just over, and I think all of us are happy to take questions. So I'll hand you back to Frankie and Tamsin.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody. That was really fascinating. Sorry that we have run over a tiny bit. If anybody needs to go, please do so. We'll just have a few minutes for questions. So it was very useful and interesting to know what goes on in the background in these NSIP applications, what the processes are, and how long it all takes, a very, very long time, and how statutory consultees like Historic England and the Gardens Trust must respond. And it really highlights, I think, how important research is in identifying the significances of the sites that really need to be protected the most. So I think, yes, we'll take questions in just a second, but before we do, I just want to quickly tell you about the next webinar. So we've heard quite a lot today about development proposals in the setting of a design landscape and how they can affect a site. So next time on the 29th of May, I'll be looking at setting in more detail, explaining how there are different kinds of setting. It's not just visual, and how important they are to a landscape's design, significance and value. So if you haven't already booked, I think Frankie's going to put the link in. So let's just turn to the questions. If anybody has any, I'll just stop sharing. Right, Frankie, do you have any?
So we don't have any questions at the moment, but just while we're waiting for a couple to come in, I'll just launch our end of webinar poll. If you wouldn't mind just completing that quickly before you leave, that would be really useful. But if anyone does have any questions, just pop them in the chat, or you can always email us after this and we'll happily answer any questions. But I'll just give people a few minutes to complete the poll.
Fantastic. I think there was so much information in that talk that probably everybody's questions have already been answered. Thank you ever so much for our two main speakers, and for Chris for coming along as well and giving us all that very useful information on World Heritage Sites. We really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. I feel we may have got away with so many questions. So if anybody wants to have a couple of minutes to pipe up if they need to.
Yeah.
I can see some responses are coming in for the poll. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. So we'll get the link to this recording and the PDF of the slides sent out to you very soon, so that if you need to revisit it, you can. And yes, do get in touch with us if you have any queries. And otherwise, we look forward to seeing you at the next session on the 29th of May. Thanks very much for coming, everybody, today.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you
Thanks.
next
And
time.
a huge thank you again to our speakers. Thank you
You're
all.
welcome.
Bye, you're welcome.
Stop recording, Frankie, if you haven't done so already.